Hello and welcome to Business Standard Views of the Week. How does India afford a falling labor participation rate? Should the legal marriage age for women be increased from 18 to 21? And which was a real hot button issue that the opposition didn't bring up during the winter session of Parliament? Subscribe to Business Standard and read this week's top opinion pieces to find out. We start this episode with an analysis highlighting some of the worrying trends that supplement India's falling labor participation rate. The median monthly household income in India was around Rs 15,000 and consumption expenditure was around Rs 11,000 in June 2021 according to CMI's Consumer Pyramids Household Survey. The headroom for savings in absolute terms for half the population is thus too small to permit them the luxury of remaining away from the labor markets over an extended period of time. So what explains the fall in labor participation rate from 46% in 2016 to 40% this year? In his latest column, Mahesh Vyas points out that the fall in LPR since 2016 has been accompanied with a fall in the proportion of households where more than one person is employed. The proportion of households where more than one person is employed has fallen from 34.7% in 2016 to 24% for the first 11 months of 2021. Vyas writes that we need to examine what has led to this fall in the proportion of households with more than one person employed. Do households withdraw working members from the labor markets because of low wages? Or is it because of people losing jobs amid the pandemic? Either way, households with only one employed person can be considered to be somewhat vulnerable. Worryingly, their proportion is rising. We move on to another pressing issue for governance, the new COVID variant Omicron. Now that we know that Omicron is present in India, the situation requires renewed efforts to contain the spread of COVID. In its editorial, Business Standard suggests that since vaccine supplies are not an issue now, the government would do well to shorten the gap between the first and second doses so that the entire population of India can be fully vaccinated. A booster usually requires a different vaccine from the original two doses. Since the bulk of India has had the Covishield jab, the booster would have to be Covaxin, which is simply not being produced in large enough numbers to be available for boosters. Fast tracking approvals of foreign vaccines should also be considered urgently. We now talk about a recent proposal by the government which has divided opinions. The government's decision to amend the law to raise the legal marriage age for women from 18 to 21 on par with men is welcome as a means of attaining gender parity. The intent of the amendment is irreproachable: improve women's health and lower the maternal and infant mortality rates and increase the sex ratio at birth. However, in an editorial, Business Standard explains that merely increasing the marriage age for women won't work unless it is complemented by efforts to increase the access to education for the girl child. While the civil laws can be amended by parliament, the government has indicated that Hindu and Christian personal law will also need to be tweaked. This leaves open the question of Muslim personal law, which sets the minimum marriageable age for both girls and boys at 15 years. The zeal to protect the rights of all Indian women, irrespective of their religion, should not end up creating a communal flashpoint. Moving on to matters of the economy. As expected, governments, including those in India, have responded to the pandemic through a variety of measures, including an increase in expenditure. But how has the expenditure boost played out for public finance in India in the past 2 years? The first big takeaway for India's public finance is that, as it happened in the wake of past crises, governments after COVID 19 have become bigger. Total government expenditure before the pandemic stayed at around 29% of GDP. In 2020-21, it went up sharply to over 36% of GDP. In his latest column, A.K. Bhattacharya points out that the center responded with a far bigger stimulus in the first year of the pandemic than the states. It is possible that the state's financial conditions did not allow them to come up with a better response. Bhattacharya writes that if the center and the states are keen on spending more to meet the COVID 19 challenges in the coming year, they must bear in mind the need for steps to raise more resources through taxes as well as non tax revenues, without which the fiscal deficit cannot be reduced. In a related piece, Business Standard talks about how the government should soon start privatizing public sector banks. It is not clear why the government is delaying the process after having announced its intent in the budget. The names of two PSBs that will be put on the block have also not been made public. The government would do well to start the process soon if it intends to complete it even in the next fiscal year. The need for reducing the government's stake in the banking system cannot be overstated, and the government must be commended for having announced its intent to privatize PSBs. Finally, we bring this episode of BS Views to a close with a thoughtful commentary on how, even within democratic nations, there seems to be a club of populist leaders, and their praise can be used interchangeably. In his latest column, T.N. Lennon demonstrates this by quoting from Tom McTague's profile of Boris Johnson. He quotes, "People are more patient with him, they are more forgiving of him, because he is not a typical politician. That frustrates Boris Johnson's opposition. That nothing ever seems to stick to him drives his opponents mad. Time and again, when controversy has engulfed him, he has emerged unscathed. Part of his electoral genius lies in his ability to stop his opponents from thinking straight. In their hatred for him, they cannot see why he is popular, nor what to do about it. Nenan then writes that this passage could have easily been used to describe Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Even though PM Modi is usually clubbed with Turkey's Recep Erdogan, Hungary's Viktor Orban, and Brazil's Jair Bolsonaro, autocratic populists all. So the point is that in the celebrated bastions of democracy too, populists have formed a club.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.